He walked out of our bedroom at 6 in the morning with a packed suitcase and a rehearsed speech about how his friends thought he deserved better. Better. Like I was a rental car he'd grown tired of. Like 7 years of marriage was a subscription he wanted to cancel. He had this look on his face, patient, almost kind, like he was doing me a favor by telling me the truth. He had absolutely no idea what I'd built while he was busy deciding I wasn't impressive enough. And honestly, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I heard the dresser drawers first. That's what woke me. Not an alarm, not a voice. Just the sound of drawers opening and closing with that particular kind of careful precision that people use when they're trying not to wake you, but also want you to know something is happening. I lay still for a second, listened. The closet door, a zipper. I rolled over and looked at the clock. 6:14 in the morning. Elliot was standing at the foot of the bed, folding a shirt into a suitcase with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for his quarterly reports. He was already dressed, gray pants, the blue button-down I'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, hair combed, shoes on. I sat up. "What are you doing?" He didn't look at me right away, just kept folding. "I'm going to stay at Conrad's for a few days." I waited. There was clearly more. He set the shirt down, finally turned to face me, and his expression, I want to be precise about this because it matters, his expression was not guilty. It was not ashamed. It was measured, composed. The face of a man who had prepared what he was about to say and felt pretty good about it. "I need some space to think," he said, "about us, about where I want this to go." I pulled the blanket up a little. "Where you want this to go." "You're a great person, Kathleen." He always used my full name when he was about to say something that was going to sting. But I've been having some real conversations lately, with Conrad, with some of the others, and I think I've been getting some perspective that I needed to hear. From Conrad and Sienna. He said the name carefully, like it was just a name, like I was supposed to hear it that way. She made a point last week that really stuck with me. She said that someone at my level, someone with my drive and trajectory, deserves a partner who matches that energy, someone who's also building something. I didn't say anything. I was watching his face. "I'm not saying you don't work hard," he said, which is something people say right before they explain all the ways you don't work hard enough. But I think I need to figure out if I'm where I'm supposed to be. If this, he gestured at the room, at the framed photos on the dresser, at 7 years of Saturdays and grocery runs and inside jokes. If this is actually what I want, he picked up the suitcase, set it on its wheels, gripped the handle. "So I'm going to take a few days at Conrad's, think things through." He looked at me then, really looked, maybe for the first time that morning, and I could see he was expecting something. Tears, maybe, or a question, or at least a flinch. I said, "Okay." He blinked. "Okay? Take whatever time you need." Something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of, I don't know, confusion, maybe the beginning of doubt. But he smoothed it over fast, nodded once, the way men do when they want to look like they've handled something well. "I'll be in touch," he said, and he walked out of our bedroom, through our living room, out of our apartment, my apartment, but he didn't know that part yet, and closed the front door behind him with a quiet, deliberate click. I sat in the silence for about 30 seconds. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of coffee. Here's what Elliot did not know on the morning he left with that suitcase. 3 days earlier, a company called Elevation Partners had wired $12.4 million into a business account. Not my personal account. The account belonging to Callaway Reed Communications, the crisis management firm I had co-founded with my business partner Miriam 3 years ago. My share of that acquisition, $12.4 million. Miriam's share was slightly less because of how we'd structured the equity, but she was not upset about it. Neither of us were doing a lot of complaining about anything in the last 72 hours. We'd started the firm during a long weekend in my kitchen. Miriam had just left a senior position at a PR agency downtown after a brutal round of layoffs. I'd been doing freelance crisis consulting for tech companies for 2 years by then. The kind of work nobody advertises because the companies hiring you are trying to keep things quiet. Data breaches, executive behavior problems, products that hurt people, the communications disasters that regular firms won't touch because the liability makes them nervous. We were good at it, better than good. Within 18 months, we had 4 full-time clients and a waiting list. Within 2 years, Elevation Partners had called us for the first time. I never talked about any of this at home. That might sound strange. It might even sound calculated. But here's the truth, and I want to be honest about it. I didn't hide the business because I was planning something. I hid it because Elliot had such a clear and comfortable story about our marriage, about who he was and what he'd built, and who I was in relation to all of it. And I had spent years telling myself that not disrupting that story was what a good partner did. He was the one with the career, the title, the firm. He came home and talked about his projects the way some people talk about religion, with genuine passion and an assumption that everyone in the room shared it. And I listened. I asked questions. I made his favorite meals on late nights when he needed to decompress. I went to his work events and smiled at his colleagues and never once, in 7 years, said, "I signed a 6-figure client today. I landed the account that keeps 3 of our staff employed. My name is on something that's actually changing how this industry works." Why not? I've thought about that a lot, probably too much. Because he needed to be the one building something. Because I thought that's what love looked like. Making room for someone else's story even when yours was just as interesting. Maybe more so. And maybe, this is the part I had a harder time admitting, maybe I was curious how long it would take him to notice on his own. To ask. To wonder, even once, what I was actually doing in that home office every day. He never did. The acquisition closed on a Tuesday. I sat at my desk, alone in the office Miriam and I shared in the design district, stared at the wire transfer confirmation on my screen for a long time, and then called Miriam and cried, happy crying. The kind that comes out of nowhere and surprises you. 2 days later, my husband left me for a suitcase full of other people's opinions about my worth. Timing, as they say, is everything. Let me back up a little, because I don't want you to misunderstand what kind of marriage this was. We met 11 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. Elliot was 32, already several years into his career at an architecture firm, sharp and funny and genuinely good company. He had this way of explaining his work, the way a building could change how people felt about a neighborhood, how design could be an act of optimism, that I found completely magnetic. I was doing communications consulting by then, mostly for small tech startups. Nothing glamorous. But I was good at it, and I liked it, and I was building something. We dated for 2 years and got married at my parents' place in the hill country outside Austin. Small ceremony. His parents, my parents, a handful of close friends. I wore my grandmother's earrings. He cried during his vows. I cried during his vows. Our friend Dennis played guitar during the reception, and it went too long and nobody cared. The first few years were genuinely good. We were both busy. We were both happy. We cooked dinners together and took trips and stayed up too late arguing about things that didn't matter. He was proud of his work. I was proud of mine. We shared a life. But something shifts, slowly, in a marriage. You don't notice it while it's happening. It's like the way a room gets darker when the sun moves. You don't see it moment to moment. You just eventually realize the light is different, and you can't remember when it changed. Elliot got a major promotion around year 3. His firm was doing well. He started being written up in trade publications. He was invited to speak at conferences, and he came home from those trips lit up and expansive. And I made dinner and listened and asked the right questions. And I think somewhere in there, we both settled into a version of our marriage that was comfortable, but a little unequal. I covered rent for 2 full years while he was building seniority at the firm, and the pay hadn't caught up to the responsibility. I said nothing about it. That's what partners do. When the firm restructured 18 months ago and cut his salary by 30%, I quietly transferred money from my business account to our joint account every month for 8 months until his compensation was restored. He was embarrassed about the restructuring, and I didn't want to add to that. I never brought it up. Last March, he fell in love with a particular SUV that was, in his words, more him than any car he'd driven. Test drove it 4 weekends in a row. I called the dealership and put $20,000 down without telling him. He thought the financing just worked out better than expected. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound like a saint. I made choices. I could have been different. I could have said, "This is my money too, and this is my work too, and I want you to see me." I didn't, and I owned that. But there is a difference between choosing to be generous and being told by your husband on a Tuesday morning that your level of impressiveness has been discussed and found wanting. That part was not a choice I made. I gave myself 48 hours to feel whatever I was feeling before I did anything else. I cried some, ate half a pizza standing at the kitchen counter at midnight, watched 2 episodes of a show I don't even remember the name of, called my older sister Deirdre in Denver, and talked for an hour without really saying what was happening, just enough to hear her voice. Then, on day 3, I sat down at my kitchen table with Elliot's tablet. He'd left it charging on the counter. Classic. He was always leaving things behind. Sunglasses, chargers, his sense of proportion. I wasn't planning to snoop. I want to be clear about that. I opened it to check something on our shared grocery app, and I saw the messages because the screen came up on his texts. Conrad, Sienna, a group thread that included 2 other names I recognized from his work circle. Devin and Harper. I want to be careful about what I say here because the details matter, and I want to get them right. The messages were not explosive. There was no dramatic confessional. What there was, strung together across the last 5 months, was a pattern. Sienna texting Elliot directly, separate from the group. Lunch plans that came up twice a month, sometimes more. A particular quality to the conversation. Personal, warm, a little too familiar in the way that people who are interested in each other sometimes talk when they're not quite ready to admit it. Elliot's responses were shorter, more careful, but he kept the conversation going, every time. I sat with that for a long time. Then I looked at the group thread and found what I was actually looking for, the context for what he'd said to me. There it was, 3 weeks before that morning with the suitcase. Sienna in the group chat saying that she'd been thinking about what makes someone a real partner versus just a comfortable habit, going on about ambition and compatibility and how she worried about friends who'd settled, the others chiming in, agreeing, offering their own versions of the same thought, and Elliot, my husband, writing back, "You're not wrong. Been thinking about this lately." That was it. That was the origin story of the morning he stood in our bedroom with his shirts folded and told me I wasn't impressive enough. I closed the tablet, set it back on the counter exactly where I'd found it, charging side down. I poured myself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and then I called Miriam. Miriam answered on the second ring. I could hear she was still at the office. Keyboards in the background, the particular ambient hum of the space we'd spent 3 years building. I told her everything, all of it. The suitcase, the speech, the tablet, Sienna, the group chat, the whole story in one long, run-on sentence that I had to stop and restart twice. When I finished, there was a pause. "His birthday dinner," Miriam said. "What?" "He always does that big birthday dinner. Everybody from his orbit. This is what, 2 weeks away?" I blinked. She was right. Elliot's birthday was the 20th. He'd already mentioned the dinner at least 3 times. The restaurant, the guest list. He'd been looking forward to it the way he looked forward to most things that centered around him in a room full of people who admired him. "You're already thinking about this," I said. "I'm thinking that man is going to walk into a dinner surrounded by everyone who's been told you're unremarkable," Miriam said, "and he doesn't know a single thing that's actually true about you. And the acquisition just closed, and you have documentation for everything." I was quiet for a moment. "It would have to be handled right," I said. "It would have to be calm," she agreed. "No yelling, no drama, just facts, the kind that land like a building falling over." I thought about Sienna in that group chat, philosophizing about ambition and settling, about Conrad nodding along, about Devon and Harper, whoever they were to Elliot's story, offering their chorus of agreement. "I want them all there," I said. "Then invite them." I picked up my pen. "I'll need to find a restaurant." "I know a place," Miriam said. "You're going to love the private dining room." That was how it started. Elliot came home after 5 days at Conrad's. I heard his key in the lock on a Thursday evening while I was in the middle of a call with a client, a tech startup navigating a fairly ugly data leak that had just gone public. I held up one finger in a gesture no one could see, kept talking, took 3 more minutes to finish the call and close my laptop before I went to the door. He looked tired, a little sheepish maybe, though he covered it quickly. He was carrying his suitcase and a bag from the deli on Clement Street. He'd brought home dinner, an apology in the shape of pastrami on rye. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. We stood in the doorway for a beat. He was clearly waiting to see how I was going to handle this. Whether I was going to cry or be cold or ask a lot of questions, I stepped back to let him in. "How was the drive?" I asked. He blinked. "Fine, easy, no traffic." "Good." I took the deli bag. "I'll get plates." We ate dinner at the kitchen table. He talked about Conrad's apartment, new construction in the Mission, nice views, and about a project meeting he'd had that morning that went well. I listened. I asked a question about the project. He relaxed, visibly, and talked for a while, and I could see the tension draining out of his shoulders as he went. He thought this was over. He thought I had processed it and forgiven it, and we were moving back to normal. I let him think that. After dinner, he said, almost casually, "Conrad mentioned the birthday dinner. I didn't know if we were still already taken care of," I said. "I booked Meridian." He looked up. Meridian was one of the nicer private dining rooms in the city. He'd mentioned it once, months ago, as the kind of place you went for something that mattered. Wow, thank you. "I thought it should be a real celebration," I said. And I meant that, just not the way he understood it. "The guest list? Send me whoever you want on your end. I'll handle the rest." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're something, you know that?" "I'm starting to think so," I said. Miriam had a rule about documentation. If you're going to say something, be able to prove it. Twice. We'd built our whole business on that principle. In crisis communications, you do not walk into a room with a claim you can't back up. You get the receipts first, then you talk. So I got the receipts. I pulled the wire transfer confirmation from the acquisition. Clean, official. The full amount with the date and the name of both accounts. I saved it to a folder on my phone and a separate folder in the cloud. I pulled the business registration documents for Callaway Reed Communications. My name, Miriam's name. 3 years of history right there. I pulled the rent ledger for the apartment. My name on the lease going back to before the marriage, every payment drawn from my accounts, the full timeline. I pulled the bank transfer records. Every month I'd quietly moved money from my business account to the joint account during the restructuring period. Dates, amounts, no ambiguity. I pulled the down payment receipt for the SUV, my account, the dealership, $20,000, 11 months ago. I organized all of it into a printed packet. Clean copies, in order, paper-clipped. 12 pages total. Miriam looked at it when I brought it to the office. "You could wallpaper a courthouse with this," she said. "It's not for a courthouse," I said. "No," she agreed. "It's better than that." I drove home with the packet in my bag and a date circled on my calendar. 10 days. 8 days before the dinner, I got a call from a woman named Dina. Dina ran in some of the same social circles as Sienna. She'd been to a couple of Elliot's work events. We'd had perfectly pleasant 10-minute conversations at parties. Not a friend, exactly. An acquaintance with a friendly face. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said she'd heard through the grapevine that there might be some turbulence between me and Elliot, and she wanted to give me a heads up about something. She'd apparently had brunch with Conrad's wife, Barbara, over the weekend, and Barbara had mentioned, not specifics, just the general shape of things, that Elliot had been talking to people about the state of our marriage. I think he's planning to use the birthday dinner as a kind of reset, Dina said. From what Barbara said, he's been telling people that you've been going through some things emotionally and that he's been trying to be patient. That the dinner is a chance for everyone to see you two are solid. I sat down slowly on the edge of my desk chair. He's already told people a version of this, I said. I think so. I just thought you should know, so you're not caught off guard. I thanked her. I got off the phone, and I spent the next 4 days rebuilding my entire approach from the ground up. If Elliot had already framed the story, if everyone walking into that dinner expected to see a woman who'd been struggling and a husband who'd been enduring, then the numbers alone wouldn't be enough. I'd need to address the narrative directly. I started drafting a whole second layer to my remarks, a rebuttal to a story I'd never been given a chance to tell. I wrote and rewrote. I consulted Miriam. I lost a night of sleep running through different scenarios, different versions of the room, different ways this could go sideways. By the time I showed up to the restaurant for a walkthrough 4 days before the dinner, I had 2 completely different speeches outlined and no clear idea which one to use. Miriam met me there. We sat in the private dining room, which was beautiful, long table, warm light, a window that looked out over the street, and I spread my notes on the table in front of her. She read through them again. Then she looked at me. Dina's wrong, she said. You don't know that. I know you've been rewriting for 4 days based on secondhand information from someone who was told something by someone else, who was told something by Conrad's wife. She tapped the original notes. This is still what works. The facts. Your name on everything. You don't need to fight a story he may or may not have told. Let the truth do it. I sat back, rubbed my eyes. She was right. I'd wasted 4 days building a defense against an offense that might not even exist. I had let Dina's tip send me spinning in a direction that wasn't mine. I gathered up the extra pages and set them aside. Back to basics, I said. Back to basics, Miriam agreed. There's something useful about having a plan fall apart on you, if it happens early enough. You get clear. I spent the 2 days before the dinner stripping everything back to what was simple and true. No counter-narrative, no emotional speech, just the facts, in the right order, at the right moment, in front of the right people. Miriam helped me run through it once. Not rehearsed. We didn't do it line by line because that would have made it sound like a performance. More like a conversation. What do you want them to know first? What matters most? What does the end of this look like? The end of this, I said, looks like everyone in that room understanding that they don't know who I am, that they've been given a false picture, not dramatically, just accurately. Miriam nodded. And Elliot? I thought about that. Elliot gets to find out what he married, I said. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. The night before, I ironed the dress I was going to wear, a deep green that I'd bought 6 months ago and never found an occasion for, and I laid it out on the chair in the corner. I set my phone to charge. I put the documentation packet in my bag. I went to bed at 10:30. I slept fine. The call came 2 nights before the dinner, just after 9. I didn't recognize the number at first, but I picked up because I was expecting a call back from the restaurant about the catering order. Kathleen, this is Barbara, Conrad's wife. I sat up straighter. Barbara. Hi. A pause. She was choosing her words carefully, I could tell. "I'm sorry to call like this. I debated it for about a week. I finally decided you'd want to know." She told me what she'd seen, not rumors. What she had, actually, personally witnessed. A dinner last month where Conrad had invited Sienna, Elliot had shown up late, and the three of them had ended up at a corner table while Barbara sat with two other couples near the bar. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see it. The way Sienna leaned in, the way Elliot laughed, the particular ease between them that doesn't belong at a professional dinner between colleagues. "I asked Conrad about it when we got home," Barbara said. "He told me I was imagining things. And maybe I was. But I've been married to Conrad for 14 years, and I know the difference between a work friendship and whatever that was." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Another pause. "Because I like you," she said simply. "I've always liked you. And because I'm angry at Conrad for knowing whatever he knows and saying nothing. And if I'm being completely honest," her voice shifted, got a little drier, a little more real, "because I'm tired of watching the women in this friend group absorb things quietly and never say a word." I understood her perfectly. I told her about the dinner, what I was planning in general terms, not the specifics, but enough. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "I'll be there." "You don't have to. I want to. And if you need someone to confirm what they saw, that's me. I'll sit where you put me, and I'll be there if you need me." I thanked her. When I hung up, I sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel in that week, less alone. I couldn't sleep. That wasn't a surprise. I'd known it probably wouldn't happen, not real sleep anyway. I lay in bed until about 1 in the morning, watching the ceiling and listening to the city outside. Then I gave up, went to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of chamomile tea that I didn't really want, because making it gave me something to do with my hands. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone off and the folder in front of me, and I thought about things, not the plan. I'd stopped thinking about the plan 2 days ago. I was done with the plan. I thought about the morning I met Elliot, his friend's birthday party in a converted warehouse in the East Bay, paper lanterns hanging from the ceiling, the whole thing slightly too loud. He'd been explaining something to someone I didn't know, using a cardboard coaster to sketch a diagram, and there was something so fully alive in his face that I walked over without being introduced and asked what he was drawing. He'd looked up, smiled, showed me the diagram. We talked for 2 hours. I missed the last BART train home. I didn't care. I thought about the good years. And there were good years. I want to be clear about that. The camping trip where it rained the entire time, and we ate granola bars in the tent and laughed until we hurt. The night his mother had a health scare, and I drove him to the hospital and sat with him for 6 hours and held his hand. The Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper spread across the floor in a particular shaft of light that I still think of when I think of what happiness looks like. I thought about when it started shifting, how gradual it was. The way he started referring to my work in shorthand at parties. "Kathleen does consulting. She helps with communication stuff." Delivered with such easy confidence, as if that summarized it, as if there was nothing more to say. How I'd smiled and not corrected it. How I did that for years. I looked at the folder on the table, the wire transfer, the lease, the receipts, my name on everything. I had spent 3 years building a company that changed how our industry handled crisis communications. I had 3 employees I genuinely cared about. I had clients who called me at midnight because I was the person they trusted when everything was on fire. I had built something real in the margins of a marriage that had slowly stopped leaving room for me, and not one single time had Elliot asked what I was working on, what I was proud of, what I wanted. Not once. I sat there for a while longer. The tea went cold. Then I rinsed out the mug, put it on the drying rack, and went back to bed. I slept for 4 hours. It was enough. Meridian had a private dining room on the 2nd floor that seated 24. We had 22. Elliot's side, Conrad and Barbara, Sienna, 3 colleagues from his firm, his parents, and 2 couples from the broader social circle. The kind of friends who come to every gathering and never quite take a side about anything. My side, Miriam, my sister Deirdre, who'd flown in from Denver the night before, 2 of my closest friends from before the marriage, a woman named Rosalind who taught high school history and was the funniest person I knew, and her partner, and a former client who'd become a genuine friend, a startup founder named Thomas who was in town for a conference anyway. Barbara sat on Elliot's side as Conrad's wife, but she caught my eye when she came in and gave me a small nod that said everything. Elliot arrived looking happy. He'd gotten a haircut that day. I noticed it immediately. He was wearing the suit I liked on him, the charcoal one, and he'd put some effort into looking well. He made the rounds when he came in, shaking hands, embracing his parents, trading the kind of easy jokes that people make when they're comfortable in a room. He put his arm around me briefly when he got to where I was standing. "This is incredible," he said quietly, nodding at the room, the table, the flowers I'd chosen. "You did all this." "I did," I said. He kissed my cheek. "Thank you." "Of course," I said. We sat down for dinner. The food was good. The conversation moved the way it does at a table where most people know each other, overlapping and easy, punctuated by laughter. Elliot's father told a story I'd heard before. Sienna sat across from Conrad and 3 seats down from me, and she was carefully, professionally pleasant whenever our eyes met. Miriam sat at my right hand and ate her salmon and said very little. Elliot ordered a second glass of wine. I ordered water. We ate. We talked. The table cleared the main course. The server came around to check on dessert orders, and then I picked up my glass and stood up. I didn't get very far. I had just stood up, glass in hand, the table still settling into its expectant quiet, when Sienna appeared at my elbow. Not from across the room, she'd been seated close enough to step up before I could even begin. Kathleen. She kept her voice low, pleasant, conversational, the voice you use when you want something to sound like a private chat between reasonable adults. "Can I grab you for 1 second? Restroom?" I looked at her. She smiled, held my gaze. Not aggressive, something worse than aggressive. Composed. I set my glass down, followed her into the hallway outside the dining room near the restrooms where the noise from the table dimmed enough to have a conversation. I just wanted to say something before things get any kind of formal in there, she said. She wasn't fidgeting. She seemed to have thought about this. "I know that things have been hard lately, between you and Elliot. He's talked to me about some of it, and I want you to know that I think he genuinely cares about you. Whatever you're about to do in there, I hope it comes from a good place." I looked at her for a long moment. "Is that it?" She hesitated. "He told me you've been struggling, that this year has been hard for you personally. I wanted you to know that no one in there is judging you." "That's very thoughtful," I said. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Sienna." I excused myself and went back. And here is where the evening threw me its first real surprise. When I got back to my chair, my bag had been moved. Someone had shifted it from the back of my seat to the floor on the other side, probably making room when they cleared the dishes. The printed documentation packet I had carried in there, 12 clean pages and a paperclip, was gone from the front pocket. I looked under the table. I looked at Miriam. She hadn't seen anything. It was just gone. I stood there for 2 full seconds, hand on the back of my chair, and I felt the floor of my plan fall out. Then Miriam looked up at me and said very quietly, "Your phone." Right. The phone. I had photographed every single document. All of it was on my phone and in the cloud, right where it had been for 2 weeks. I had built a backup and forgotten I had it. I took a breath, picked up my glass, stood back up. The room quieted faster than I expected. 22 people do not always go quiet at once, but something in how I stood Not anxious, not performing, just still. Must have registered. The last 2 conversations died away. Elliot's mother set down her dessert fork. Elliot looked up from his wine and saw my face, and I watched something change behind his eyes, some animal alert shift, and then he smiled carefully and waited. "I want to say a few things about this man," I started, "and about this marriage, and about the last 7 years. And I want to start by thanking everyone for being here, because it genuinely matters to me that the people Elliot is closest to are in this room right now." A few warm nods. Someone murmured something nice. When Elliot and I got together 11 years ago, I was doing freelance communications work, small stuff, startups, local companies. Elliot had just made junior partner and he was magnetic about it. He loved what he was doing, and I loved watching him love it. I paused. Let that sit. Over the years, as some of you know, Elliot became someone his industry pays real attention to. He built a reputation. He got written up. He was asked to speak at conferences, and I was proud of him, genuinely. I showed up to his events. I listened to his projects. I made dinner when he worked late. I was good at being the person in the background. I looked at Elliot. He was very still. "About a week ago," I said, "Elliot told me that he'd been having some conversations, that people he respected had raised questions about whether I was the right partner for him, that someone had made a point about ambition and compatibility, and whether he was, and I'm going to use the word he used, remarkable enough to be with someone unremarkable." Silence. Not total silence. A few people shifted. Someone put down a glass, but the conversational hum was gone. "I've thought about that word a lot this week," I said. "Unremarkable. I want to make sure I understand it correctly, and I want to share some context with everyone, because I think there may be some gaps in the information this group has been working with." I picked up my phone, opened the folder, turned it so the screen faced Elliot. 3 days before Elliot and I had that conversation, a company called Elevation Partners completed the acquisition of Callaway Reed Communications, a crisis management firm I co-founded 3 years ago with my business partner Miriam, who is sitting right there. I nodded toward Miriam. She did not wave. My share of that acquisition was $12.4 million. The room stayed quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. I have the wire transfer confirmation on my phone if anyone wants to see it. I'll leave that offer open. I set the phone down. The apartment we have shared for the past 7 years. The one Elliot has been staying in for the last week while he thought about whether I was worth his time. The lease has been in my name since before we were married. Elliot moved in with me. I want to make sure that's clear. Elliot's father had gone very still. When Elliot's firm restructured 2 years ago and his salary was cut, I covered the shortfall every month for 8 months by transferring money from my business account to our joint account. He was embarrassed about the restructuring and I didn't want to make it worse, so I did it quietly. We never discussed it. I heard someone say, very quietly, "Jesus, the SUV Elliot has been driving for the past 11 months, the one he picked out after test driving it 4 weekends in a row. I put $20,000 down on it. His name is on the financing. My money paid for the start of it." Elliot had not moved. His face was a color I did not have a name for, not pale exactly, ashy, like something had been drained out. "I am not telling you any of this to humiliate my husband," I said, and I meant it. "I am telling you because some people in this room have apparently been weighing in on the question of my value, and I think the assessment was incomplete." I looked around the table. Not at Sienna specifically, just at the room. I built a business in the time I was described as comfortable and quiet and supportive. I funded this marriage while being told it was the other way around. I kept quiet about all of it because I thought that's what a good partner did. Make room for someone else's story. I looked at Elliot directly. "I don't think that anymore," I said. I picked up my glass. Happy birthday, Elliot. I hope the dinner was everything you wanted. I drank. I set the glass down and sat. The silence lasted longer than I expected. Not the stunned, electric kind from movies. This was more like the moment after you hear a loud sound and your brain is still catching up to whether it was real. Then Elliot's mother, Margaret, a 68-year-old woman from outside Portland who had always been carefully pleasant to me without ever being particularly warm, turned to look at her son with an expression I can only describe as recognition. Like something she'd suspected had just been confirmed. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him. Elliot opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Kathleen, the acquisition, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. You should have told me. You should have asked. That landed. I could see it land. Not just with Elliot, but with the people around him who had been nodding along to a version of our marriage that had nothing to do with the actual facts. Conrad was studying the tablecloth with tremendous focus. Sienna had picked up her wine glass and was looking somewhere in the middle distance. Not at me, not at Elliot, at a fixed point slightly to the right of the breadbasket. Miriam ate a bite of her dessert calmly. Elliot's colleague from the firm, a man named Terrence, who I'd always liked, actually, someone who'd been to our home for dinner twice, looked up at me, looked at Elliot, and then back at me with an expression that I'd call respectful. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Elliot's father reached over and put his hand briefly on Margaret's arm, a settling gesture. She let him. This isn't, Elliot started, then stopped. He ran a hand through his hair. This isn't how I thought tonight was going to go. I know, I said, and we should talk privately. After, we can do that, I said, but I wanted your friends to know who they've been discussing. I kept my voice even, not unkind, because the information they were working with was wrong. Deirdre, my sister, had her arms crossed and a particular look on her face that she'd been wearing since I was 9 years old and she was 12, and someone said something unfair. She wasn't going to say anything. She didn't have to. Barbara, across the table, looked at Conrad with a look that promised a very long conversation on the drive home. Someone, I think it was one of the couples I didn't know well sitting near the far end, quietly asked the server for the check. The dinner didn't exactly end. It just gradually stopped being what it had been. People finished their desserts or didn't. Conversations picked back up in smaller clusters, a little lower, a little more careful. Elliot's parents spoke to each other quietly for a while. Sienna at some point said goodnight and was gone. I talked to Rosalind for 20 minutes about her semester, about her students, about a book she was reading. I was fully present for all of it. At 10:15, I said goodnight to the room. I thanked the staff. I picked up my bag and got my coat from the rack by the door and walked out. Elliot didn't follow me. That was fine. Miriam caught up with me on the sidewalk outside. We didn't talk for a half a block, just walked. The city was doing what it does on a Friday night, alive and indifferent and lit up. A couple walked past us laughing. A delivery cyclist wove through the intersection. The air was cold and clean. "How do you feel?" Miriam asked eventually. I thought about it honestly. Not the way I thought I would. How did you think you would? I don't know. Bigger? Louder, somehow? Miriam was quiet for a moment. I thought you were going to start shaking in there about halfway through. I thought so too, I said. We turned the corner toward a bar we both liked. Nothing fancy, good wine, low lighting, booths in the back where you could actually hear each other. We got a table and ordered 2 glasses of a Rhone blend that Miriam had discovered the previous winter and wouldn't stop recommending. Elliot called me while you were in the coat check, Miriam said. I looked at her. Just now? Wanted to know if you were okay. I told him you were fine and he should give you some space tonight. You picked up? I always pick up. She shrugged. He sounded bad, if that matters. I turned my wine glass slowly. "It doesn't not matter," I said, which was as honest as I could be. "I don't want him to be destroyed. I just wanted him to know the truth. He knows it now. He knows it now," I agreed. Deirdre showed up 20 minutes later, having said her goodbyes, slightly pink from the cold. She sat down, ordered her own glass, looked at me across the table with the particular expression only an older sister can manage, the one that says, "I am simultaneously proud of you and could have told you this years ago." "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Getting there." "Good." She picked up her wine. "Now someone tell me who Sienna thinks she is." And somehow, improbably in the best way, we laughed. The following 2 weeks were quieter than I expected, and noisier, quiet in the apartment. Elliot was staying at Conrad's again, this time without the suitcase theatrics, just a phone call 2 days after the dinner where he said he thought it was better to give me space, and I said I thought that was right. We had one longer conversation the following week, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, where he said the things that people say in those conversations, that he hadn't understood, that he should have paid more attention, that the things he'd said and allowed to be said about me were wrong. I listened. I said I heard him. I meant it. We didn't fight. There wasn't much left to fight about. The marriage was in the same place it had probably been for 2 years. Done. Just neither of us had been willing to say it out loud until one of us handed the other the language. I called my attorney that Thursday, started the paperwork. The lease was already in my name. The car he'd been driving, he offered to return it, which I thought was decent of him, and I said to keep it for now and we'd sort it out properly. My attorney would handle what needed to be handled. Noisy, though, in other ways. 2 of Elliot's colleagues texted me separately in the week after the dinner. Nothing elaborate, just variations of, "I didn't know, and I'm sorry." I replied to one and didn't reply to the other. Terrence, the one I'd always liked, sent a handwritten note that said simply that it had been a privilege to know me during the years we'd overlapped in Elliot's life, and he hoped I'd do well with the next chapter. I appreciated that more than I could have expected. Sienna said nothing. I hadn't expected her to. Conrad texted me once, a brief, awkward message that managed to apologize without naming anything specific, which is a particular kind of cowardice, and I deleted it and moved on. Barbara called. We talked for an hour. We made plans to get coffee, just the 2 of us, which had never happened in 7 years of being in the same social circle. She said Conrad was in what she described as extended accountability mode at home, and that she had a lot of feelings about that she was working through. I told her I was glad she'd called me before the dinner. She said she was too. Miriam and I had 3 client calls that week, which was good. Work is grounding in a way that nothing else is. We had a new inquiry from a pharmaceutical company, which we were discussing. We had a piece of press that came out about the acquisition, which was fine and accurate and mentioned both of our names and called us a disruptive force in crisis communications, which made Miriam print it out and tape it above the coffee machine in the office. I ran every morning. I slept well. I called my mother and told her the marriage was ending, and she did not say, "I told you so," which I appreciated. The apartment felt different without Elliot in it. Quieter, but also, I don't know, more like itself, more like the place I'd built before he was part of it. I bought new throw pillows. I moved the furniture in the living room around until it was in a configuration I'd always wanted and never suggested because I thought he had a preference. He'd never had a preference. He'd just never asked me. 6 weeks after the dinner, on a Tuesday afternoon, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. I almost didn't open it. I'd been good about not looking at things that felt like potential reopening of wounds. I'd been protective of my own peace in a way I hadn't been for years, and it felt important to keep doing that, but I opened it. The name in the body was mine. Short version. And I knew his voice in the first sentence. He wrote that he'd had time to think. Real time, not just the performative kind. and that he'd been sitting with what he'd said and what he'd allowed to happen in the years before that morning with the suitcase. He wrote that he'd spent a long time believing he was the person building something, not understanding that I'd been building the whole time right next to him without asking for any acknowledgement. He wrote that the way he'd let his friends talk about me, the way he'd tacitly agreed with it, the way he'd let Sienna's framing replace his own understanding of his own wife, was a failure he was going to carry for a long time. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. He said he wasn't asking for it. He said, "I see you now. I don't think I ever stopped to actually see you. I'm sorry it took losing you to figure out what I had." I read it twice. I sat with it for a while. I didn't feel nothing. I want to be honest about that. There was something in reading it, some trace of the person I'd loved, the voice I'd listened to for 11 years, the man who'd cried at our wedding in front of everyone and not been embarrassed about it. I felt that. But I also knew that understanding something too late is its own kind of arrival. You can see clearly from somewhere you can't go back to. I deleted the email, closed my laptop, went and made a cup of coffee and stood at my kitchen window and looked out at the street for a few minutes, watching nothing in particular, just the regular motion of people going about their Tuesday. Then I went back to work. The conference was in Seattle, which in February is cold and gray and somehow still beautiful if you grew up in Texas and consider clouds a novelty. 800 people, a ballroom that smelled like carpet cleaner and coffee and the particular kind of industrial air conditioning that never quite gets the temperature right, a crowd that skewed younger than me, people in their late 20s and early 30s mostly, the ones who were 3 or 4 years into building something and starting to understand what the next decade was going to ask of them. I stood backstage while the introduction was being read. Miriam was in the 3rd row. I could see her from the wing. She was on her phone. Working, probably, because she is constitutionally incapable of not working. And then she looked up toward the stage right at the moment they said my name and gave me a look that said, "Go." I walked out. For the first 30 seconds, I couldn't see anything except light. Then the room came into focus. Rows of faces, notebooks, the expectant quiet of people who came to hear something useful. I talked for 35 minutes. I talked about invisibility, not as a failure, as a strategy I'd used deliberately and then couldn't stop using. About the difference between being seen and being legible. About what it costs you to make yourself small in the name of making room for someone else, and the way that cost compounds, silently over years, until one morning you look at what you've built and realize no one around you even knows it exists. I talked about the acquisition, about Miriam, about the specific Tuesday morning when everything changed, though I didn't name Elliot and I didn't name the dinner. I didn't need to. The shape of the story was enough. I talked about the moment you decide to stop. It wasn't revenge, I said toward the end. I want to be clear about that because that's the word people use for it. Women who stop performing smallness are called vindictive. Women who tell the truth about what they've built are called difficult. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was just finally refusing to participate in someone else's story about me. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that means people are listening. Afterward, in the hallway outside the main room, a young woman caught up with me, 25, maybe 26, the kind of bright, slightly unsteady energy of someone who is working very hard at something and not yet sure it's going to land. "My boyfriend told me I should put my company on hold," she said without preamble. "He's launching something, and he said it would be better for both of us if I focused on supporting his launch first, that we could come back to mine after." I looked at her. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to launch mine," she said. But he said it's a matter of practicality, that there isn't enough bandwidth for 2 launches at once. "That might even be true," I said. She blinked. She'd expected me to tell her to run. "Bandwidth is real," I said. Some seasons you have to sequence things, but I'd ask yourself one question before you decide anything. She waited. Does he ever talk about your company the way he talks about his? When you're with his friends, in his rooms, at his dinners? Does he introduce you as someone who's building something? Or does he introduce you as someone who's there with him? She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. You already know, I said. She nodded, thanked me, walked back into the crowd with the look of someone who had arrived somewhere she'd been heading for a while without knowing it. Miriam found me 5 minutes later. Ready? She said. We had a dinner to get to, an investor conversation tomorrow morning, a client in crisis on the East Coast who needed us on a call by 8 Pacific. I put on my coat. Ready? I said. We walked out of the ballroom into the February evening, and Seattle was cold and gray and lit up with the particular stubborn beauty of a city that has decided to be alive anyway. And I was finally, completely, undeniably the same. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.